Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and this morning we're visiting with Steve Prokopchak, author, co-author with his wife Mary of the new book, Staying Together, Marriage, a Lifelong Affair, from our good friends at Destiny Image. Steve, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. It's a privilege to be here.
Steve and Mary have been married for more than 40 years and have served as marriage and family counselors for much of that time. Their first book, Called Together, is an interactive workbook that has helped thousands of engaged couples from all over the world to build a lasting marriage foundation. Steve and Mary have 3 adult children, 2 grandchildren, and reside in Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania. So, what is the secret to success of a long marriage?
Well, first I want to add that we just had a 3rd grandchild.
Oh.
So we are so excited. He was just born a week and a half ago.
Mazel tov.
Yeah, so we love marriage and we love helping couples with marriage. We love sharing about it. We love talking to singles about marriage and the call of God to marriage. But one thing we often tell them is that don't pursue marriage, pursue maturity. So I think one of the best things to pursue in our marriage is having a mature walk with God and being yourself mature so that you don't enter into that whole consumerism aspect of marriage.
Well, tell us where you met Mary, how that all came about, where you grew up, the blending of 2 families. As any marriage is, you not only marry the person, but you marry their family.
Yeah. Well, we both grew up in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, home of the wonderful Mennonite and Amish culture. We do not have that background ourselves, but we certainly appreciate it. And we also actually knew each other in high school, but we never dated there. I was in the military during the Vietnam conflict, and during that season, Mary, as a Christian friend, was writing me letters and sending me cookies. So that went directly to my stomach and my heart, and I just knew I needed to get to know her better. She was in nursing school at the time, and we believe that God brought us together. We had no idea. She says she married an airplane mechanic, and I married an espousing nurse, and so we started our life out in Virginia, actually, where I was last stationed. And then when we got out of the military, we moved back to PA, but we moved to northern PA, and there for 8 years we did some very effective mission work among teenage delinquent boys. We did that for 8 years and then finally moved back to the Lancaster County area.
Now, was that part of your association with Dove International, or is that with another group?
That was with another group. It's a private child welfare agency, but then when we moved back here to this area, to Lancaster, we became involved with Dove right away. It was in its early stages, kind of birthing pang stages, but I've been here now and on staff for 30-some years.
What was it that compelled Mary to write? Now, I grew up primarily at the same time. I'm a child of the 50s and born in the early 50s. People were going off when I was in college at Penn State in the 68, 69, 70, 71 period. But what compelled her to write to someone that she didn't have a particular romantic interest in?
Yeah, well, she knew me from some prayer meetings. I had just gotten saved when I was 17, a senior in high school. She became a Christian when she was 4 years old. So she grew up in a very godly family. I grew up in a not-so-godly family. But she wanted to encourage me, and I think praying for me, that group was praying for me. They were discipling me, and they were helping me through that time, that season of life, which was a pretty difficult season of life. So I was so grateful for every letter, every word of encouragement, every cookie and every piece of popcorn that was put in that box. Certainly just so appreciated her giving me that time. And it was called contraband. We weren't actually allowed to have it, but at mealtime we had to consume it all and then throw everything away. So anyways, it was easy. Guys, 50 guys that were hungry for anything homemade, it was pretty easy to consume.
I'm sure. It sounds like she endeared herself to you through the application of godly love. There was not a romantic component to it. It was really a faith-based component from what you described. And this is quite unusual. You know, in my Jewish life, we didn't have anything compelling like that. There was no work which we were called to do or really compelled to do. And so I hear these stories, and it encourages me that the hands and feet of the Messiah really do have a heart for ministry. This bashing that goes on in the media, the Westboro Baptist and people like that bring a negative attention to the body of Messiah really does distract and detract from the good that people are doing based on what's in their heart. And
Yes.
so it sounds like Mary was really this minister of reconciliation, this hands and feet of really applying godly love towards a fellow man that ultimately piqued your interest, provoked you to want to know her more. It's a beautiful story. Now,
Thank you.
what compelled you to come to faith at 17 in high school? That, you know, I'm trying to think about, this was in the late 60s, I'm sure, 68, 69 time frames, maybe a little bit earlier than that. But that was the time that I was in high school, 1968, graduated. Vietnam was so political, and the condition of the world was such that there were the Black Panthers, Students for a Democratic Society. There were so many political influences, anarchists. Vietnam was becoming highly politicized and an economic drain, and the lottery. You remember the lottery, of course, and hoping and praying for a low number, or a high number, I'm sorry. But yet you came to faith during this period of time. What was it that you saw, heard, or were ministered to, and by whom?
Yeah, I was a senior in high school, and I was in a band at the time, and we were playing every weekend, and there was no godly influence in that. I didn't have a godly influence in my home. I had a lot of Mennonite neighbors, farmers, and I knew they loved God. I knew that they had some kind of relationship, but it wasn't something they actually verbalized to me. We were just, I think it was something you're supposed to see. So I was attracted to that, but I just kind of thought it was religious. And if I did go to a church, it was a Lutheran church. So I never really seemed to get a whole lot from that, although I believe that you could, as a believer, if you understood what was going on. But I didn't go frequently enough, really. So I was partying every weekend. Our band was playing every weekend, and one weekend in particular, God was speaking to me. I had a little New Testament in my bedroom, and I was partying and just trying to find, worth and value, and why was I here? And I, for some reason, began to pick up that little New Testament, started to read it, and I had a guy at work that was a Christian, and he kept coming to me and saying, "Do you understand what you're reading?" And I kept saying, "No, I had no idea. I didn't know who, any of these stories were about." But I was intrigued by the Gospels, about the life of Christ, and he began explaining the Scriptures to me, and then one Sunday morning, after playing late Saturday night and then being in a party, I woke up on a basement floor with a trash can lid under my head. And that was my friends who had put a trash can lid under my head because I had been throwing up because I was sick, but I didn't even know I was throwing up. That morning, I came to the realization that if these are my friends, I hate to meet my enemies, because I could have drowned last night in my own vomit. And it was at that point where I decided I was going to stop the drinking, stop the partying, stop all this other stuff that was going on, and try to find God. And I just asked him. I said, "God, I don't know how to be saved. I would like to be. Show me." And one evening in my bedroom, I woke up and there was this light, and I just said, "Is that you, God?" And I just felt like in my spirit, I didn't hear anything audible, that it was. And I said, "Just show me that you're real. I want to know you." And he brought these people into my life, like that young man at work and Mary and others, that just began to share the gospel with me. And I just knew that was the answer, and I haven't turned back from that day.
How did your mom and dad respond to all that?
They didn't care for it, especially when I got baptized. Yeah, it was like World War III in my house. It was pretty rough, I tell you. It was pretty rough. And so going off into the military and finding godly people there and leaving home, I left home pretty young and again, never returned. But my parents are still living, and I got to say, to this day, they'd be disappointed if I lived any other way. And I think that's just the aspect of a long-term testimony and long-term love for people that don't know him.
Have they come to faith?
My mom has. My dad says that he has. He's prayed that prayer. He's 94. Being that age, I haven't seen any outward signs of that, but I just have to trust in his heart. Actually, Mary, my wife, my evangelist, who my father loves dearly, prayed that prayer of salvation with him in 2004. I was actually ministering in New Zealand, and she wrote me and said, "Your dad prayed with me today, prayed his own prayer." And so my Jesus knows, and I trust the Lord.
Yes, yes. How exciting. Now,
Yeah.
when you came back from Vietnam and you reconnected with Mary, what was that like?
Yeah, I didn't serve in Vietnam. I actually served during that era. So I wasn't in Vietnam. I actually was working in Virginia at a base. And yeah, I would come back and visit every 6 weeks or so with Mary. She was in nursing school, and our relationship progressed from that point. And we began writing letters every day. That was a day when there were no cell phones, no computers. There was a payphone, but you had to have a pocket full of change. So we rewrote letters every day and grew in a relationship with God and with one another. And it was a great way to get to, really a great way to discover each other's hearts. And just writing everything down it's too bad. I think that's missing today in our culture.
Well, it is. I think people have lost the art of crafting a letter. There's actually a book that I read several years ago, In Search of the Proverbs 31 Man. We look at scripture about the Proverbs 31 woman, and we all desire that Proverbs 31 woman, but it takes a certain man to be able to create the environment as the head of the household for her to excel, for her to be respected, for her to be known to the community. And so there are certain attributes, and part of that was being able to convey very clearly in courtship what your intentions were, and to be able to write those down. And so it was quite an interesting read as far as that was concerned. Now, did you two have a courtship, or was it more of the 60s, 70s kind of relationship?
Yeah, our desire was, I didn't understand the concept of purity, but our desire was to walk in purity, and we did. And we waited till she graduated from nursing school, and she said that yes when I asked her to marry me. And yeah, we got married in 1975, so that's 42 years ago.
How exciting. In your looking back over those years, every marriage is somewhat described as ups and downs, and the dance of getting to know each other, and then the honeymoon period wears off and you realize that this is a lifelong commitment, a covenant. How did that play out with the two of you? Did you continue to work diligently at the marriage? Did you go to church together? Did you pray together? Did you read scripture together? What was the format and formula that you were able to apply for your successful marriage?
Yeah, we sure did. We felt like, I often teach that marriage is not Christian, because marriage predates Christianity by a few years. Mm-hmm. But we knew we wanted Christ at the center of our relationship. And we did that. We went to a local church. We were very committed to that local church. We were also very committed to our jobs and all of that. We were also on the side attending college courses, and it was a very busy time, busy life. But we were growing together, and we didn't really know exactly how to do marriage. I didn't have the best example, but I learned what not to do from that example. But we realized as we went along, we realized one day that we needed a mission for our marriage. We needed that glue that would hold us together. We each had our own like individual missions of work and things that we were called to. And I taught Sunday school, work with teenagers, and she did other things. But we had a pastor come to us one day and said, "Steve and Mary, we see leadership qualities in you." And no one ever approached us. No one ever said that before. And so we were trusting his insight. And he said, "We'd like you and Mary, I'd like you guys to start a bus ministry." And I said, "Great, what's that?" And he said, "We're going to send you to a course, and we're going to buy a bus, and you're going to run all over the city of Newport News and Virginia, and you're going to pick up kids, and you're going to bring them to church, and we're going to see them saved, and blah, 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 blah." Well, that was it was just wonderful to have someone mention to us, "I see this quality of leadership in you." He called it out of us. We found our mission together was reaching these kids, visiting these families, and filling these buses. And before we left there, we had 3 buses full of kids and adults. And, we discovered from that every couple needs a mission. Every couple needs a co-mission. Every couple needs to know why they're married. And, of course, we wrote that into our Called Together book.
So it's really fundamentally, without a vision, the people perish.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's unfortunate that a lot of couples don't stay married because they don't know what the mission is to their marriage. I mean, our workplace has a mission. Our church place has a mission. Even the Lions Club has a mission.
Right.
Why isn't this first institution, this thing that God, brought Adam and Eve together and gave them a mission in the garden? Christ had a mission. The Father had a mission. We need a mission. We need that co-mission. So we teach that pretty heavily for married couples.
But you have a successful marriage. Take me through a little bit of the book Called Together and what that entailed.
Sure. That's our pre- and post-marital workbook. That's been in print many years, many people using that book. We started to give premarital counseling in our local church, and we had these loose leaf pieces of paper. So the more that we did it, the more we discovered it wasn't sufficient. We went out and we looked at and bought every piece of premarital that we could find. There was no such thing as postmarital. And the Catholics had the best premarital, the pre-Cana material, I got to tell you. So even in the evangelical church where they said you have to be Christian, you need to be married, you need to stay married, there was really no preparation for that marriage. We have that wonderful man, Norm Wright, who's written many books on marriage and others. But we decided that we needed something for our own church. We put together a manual, and that manual grew into a book. We borrowed money. We self-published that book. In that material, eventually a publisher picked that up, but in that material, it was everything we wish we would have had in premarital. And then also, because couples are spending 200 hours preparing for a wedding day, pictures and ceremony and music and flowers and food and all these things that absolutely do nothing to build marriage, we felt like we needed at least 18 hours of premarital time, counseling, sitting down, mentoring couple to couple. It wasn't a video system. It wasn't just here, read this book. But what we did was we trained dozens and dozens and dozens of couples around the world to give premarital so that these couples with a couple. And the book really takes a back seat to those couples growing in their relationship, holding them accountable to their homework. And then, once they are married, if they are called together, this couple meets with them at 3 months and at 9 months and beyond. Because as you know, that's where the rubber hits the road.
Right.
And then all of a sudden they realize, well, this is why we went through all of this premarital and why we answered all of these questions.
Over the course of your 42 years, the marriage has changed dramatically. We've gone from, I think 42 years ago, getting married in your 20s was the norm. Then we went to a period of time where it was 28 to 35, 38. Now we're back to the millennials who are coming out of college and getting married. And so we're kind of, I don't know if there's a life cycle to this marriage dynamic. I came from a world where there were still arranged marriages. There were still families involved in the selection process, if you will, and discussions happened when children were born between families in the Jewish community that talked about that. And even today, as the Orthodox community becomes more entrenched in Orthodoxy, we see more of that within certain groups within Orthodox Judaism, in the Chabad community, the Lubavitch community, the ultra-Orthodox community, where those things are still taking place. So, behold, all things are made new, like the old. So, what are you seeing? Because you're still engaged in this premarital counseling, this marriage counseling enterprise.
Yeah.
Are you seeing the couples, the ages changing?
Yeah, when it went to such older couples, even with my own children getting married in their late 20s or early 30s, it in my position, it makes it very difficult to have active grandparents. So until they finally have children and you finally get to grandparent them, and I kept telling my kids, come on, let's get with the program. I want to be able to hear my grandchildren, So I want to be able to be, I think there's a lost art in grandparenting. And so the later that we wait, the more difficult that is. But my observation was over years of this and those ages changing. So much of it was based out of fear. The fear of divorce, the fear that this was, my parents broke up, could my relationship break up as well? And so we addressed that head on, that whole fear thing that, perfect love casts out that fear.
Well, I think that's an important message. As we look at, you succeeded in marriage without a role model, so that kind of takes that excuse off the table, doesn't it?
Well, I can see we've had role models that would have been in the church. So I got so much spiritual parenting from my spiritual moms and dads in local churches. That to me has been everything. And I got to tell you, my wife's parents were, her mother just was deceased a year ago, but they were 2 months shy of being married 76 years.
Wow.
So my in-laws, who love God, they were a great example to me and received me as their son. I got to tell you, that was just amazing for me, unlike even sometimes my own family.
What was, early on in your marriage, think back to what was the most challenging part to you?
Yeah, that comes quickly. We were challenged financially. We were challenged in differing financial values. My wife and I never argued and fought. We didn't raise our voices much. We didn't throw things. We didn't call each other names. But we differed on financial values. My wife, it was, in all intents and purposes, she was the spender in the family, and I was the more conservative. She called tightwad. So it took us some years to work through that until we finally figured out that as God matures that, I needed her and she needed what I brought. We needed each other's values. But in time, as God healed that and we brought that to a life balance in our marriage, what we discovered was really important. We discovered that she wasn't a spender, she was a giver. And she discovered that I wasn't a tyrant, I was actually saving and preparing for investing in the future. So God so much turned it around and so much redeemed it that we have new titles for all of that.
How exciting. We're talking with Steve Prokopchak, co-author with his wife of 42 years, Mary Prokopchak, author of Staying Together, Marriage, a Lifelong Affair, which kind of grew out of Called Together, this incredible preparation for marriage, for post-marriage, for navigating this marathon, not looking at it as a sprint, and equipping you for success in your marriage and equipping you to understand, even if you're moving into that season of grandparent, what being a spiritual grandparent, spiritual example to others looks like. Maybe you didn't have a successful marriage. Maybe you had challenges in your own life, and you've decided that you'll just be there for your children. Understanding what marriage is supposed to look like gives you the ability to learn yourself how to be a role model, to be what Steve just spoke of, that spiritual parent, that spiritual role model, to understand what marriage is supposed to be like. Many of us have had experiences with bad role models, bad examples in our lives. Understanding what a good one looks like equips you for a new season to be able to pour into a young couple's life. We all desire to see marriages flourish. We know the heartbreak of our children and our friends' children going through the difficulties of marital issues. But what if we could do something about it? What if we could be the instrument of healing in that marriage, a voice of reason? So not just for married couples, but for those that have a desire to speak life into young marriages, to be a part of that team that helps support marriage. We're going to take a short break, and while we're on break, visit ignitinganation.com. Click on Books and Media and find today's date, August 31st. Click on Staying Together and get a copy for yourself. Learn how you can speak into your children's life and maybe make this the gift that you give them so they can find out how they can stay together. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we are talking with Steve Prokopchak, author with his wife Mary of Staying Together, Marriage, a Lifelong Affair, brought to us by our good friends at Destiny Image Publishing. Steve, welcome back to the program.
Thank you for welcoming me back. It's sure a pleasure to be here.
Steve, Staying Together is different than many of the books that I've seen on marriage. Help our audience understand what some of the subtle differences are and some of the very blatant differences.
Yeah, well, thanks. It follows our other book called Together in an attempt to say, you know, here are marriages that have a few years under their belt. How do we help them? And quite honestly, we've been 10 years in the writing of this book. We get some chapters done, and then we throw it all away. We get some chapters done again, and we throw it all away. And it's just like that wasn't what God was saying, and we just kept working at it, kept praying at it, and did a questionnaire survey. Got a lot of information back from a lot of different, especially millennials, Gen Xers. And they wrote about what would they like to see in a marriage book. So we built a lot of it on that. And then we wanted it to be different. We wanted it to be interactive. We wanted it to, a couple could read this book, maybe laying in bed or wherever on vacation. They'd read a couple pages and then they'd have 2 or 3 questions to discuss. We wanted it to make dialogue happen. So there's, you know, fill in the blank, there's budgets, but also mostly there's these questions that the couples are to ask one another as they progress through the book, and that's probably the biggest difference in this book.
Now, is this designed to be a premarital tool, a marital tool, a 10th anniversary tool, refresh and renew your dry bones marriage? What is this intended for?
Yeah, I think probably our biggest intent is for those couples that are already married and maybe they have a good marriage, they just want to improve it. Maybe it's been a little rocky and rough and they want to cover the topics that are covered in this book. Sometimes a book can be the vehicle of change. You know, it forces them to discuss some things that perhaps have been difficult to discuss and then provides some answers. So the other thing, though, I mean, we built the whole premarital stuff on mentoring, couple mentoring, and we are firm believers in. There are so many couples sitting out there in local congregations and churches that with really not finding their mission or their niche. And we believe that maybe they have a good marriage. Maybe they could mentor a couple through this, that whole spiritual parenting thing again, and couples mentoring couples. My wife and I really have test worked this material because for the last 5 years, we've been taking on 4 couples and mentoring them, all 4 couples at one time for a whole year. So we take them through this process, 12 months, and then in the 13th month, we have a retreat with them. So that's the way that we kind of use the material and want to mentor other couples in it. So it provokes the conversation, it provokes the homework, but sitting down face-to-face provokes the real-life stuff that the millennials and the Generation Xers really, really appreciate and enjoy, and the older generations as well.
You know, over the years that I did marital counseling and premarital counseling, I found that what people assume to be the most personal of topics is not what is truly the most personal of topics. My couples had no problem talking about their sex life. They had no problem talking about in-laws. They had no problem talking about their work. They had no problem talking about their expectation. But the problem came when I asked them about money. That was the sensitive, personal issue, almost like you can talk to me about all this, but now you're meddling. What have you found in your experience to be the most personal of topics?
Well, that's a great question, because we, as you know, I've shared, my wife and I dealt with the whole money issue, and that was a big thing for us. But you know, we've come to the point where we don't believe there's such a thing as incompatibility. Like, you know, God can help any two people, you know, husband and wife, to be together, to remain together, to find that mission for themselves. I think defining that mission is probably the big thing for us. We do in this book, we do a teaching on submission, and really what we get to is that the major part of that word is mission, and submission simply means under the mission. I think as couples, we've got to define what that mission is, our mission for marriage. And I think the other thing, I would add this: we share that the most intimate aspect of marriage is not sex. I mean, you can have sex with anybody and it not be intimate, as you already shared. But the most intimate thing we find in a marriage is a couple being able to pray together, being able to touch, you know, speak to their Heavenly Father together. That's a very, very intimate place. I don't know you very well, but I bet you if you and I took every Monday morning from 6 a.m. to 6:30, every Monday morning, every week, we didn't discuss the weather, we didn't discuss your family, we didn't discuss sports, all we did was pray for 30 minutes every Monday morning, I probably know you better than most people in your life. And the reason, within a few months, the reason I would know that is because in prayer I would hear your heart. And so many couples are scared to divulge their heart. They feel like they'll be judged or they'll be prayed at, or you know. But when we have that freedom to come to the Father with our deepest needs about our children, our jobs, etc., we open up something very, very intimate to one another.
Do you find that men are more prone to want to pray with their spouses, or less prone to want to pray with their spouses?
Yeah, probably less. Just not really sure how to start it. Just not really sure how to. Maybe some are afraid that their wife is going to outpray them. Maybe they think they've got to pray for 20 minutes, and we just say, no, look, start with a hug in the morning, pray a prayer blessing over one another, and go out the door. But let it build. Let it grow. Let it turn into... When our kids got into high school, now they're in their 30s, but when they got into high school, we were already praying together. But we were desperate over that influence that was going to happen to them in high school, in a public high school. And in that desperation, we got on our knees earlier in the morning and longer. And then our children would come downstairs and they'd know that we were praying, and then they would say, I have this test today, or I have that happening, or this happening, or this book was stolen, could you pray? You know, I just hope that that's been one of the most powerful messages to them, that we can't do it, but we have a Heavenly Father who can.
What is the impediment to prayer? There seems to be a roadblock. There seems to be a wall. There seems to be a discomfort almost with taking that quiet time. And I don't know that before the children come, if they're just enjoying life and running to and fro, or when children come, they feel like they need to now do something, but they don't know what to do. Yeah. They find that they're comfortable praying with their church, but not with each other. And that really is the intimacy builder. That's the ultimate intimacy builder.
I truly believe it is. You know, when we have couples in premarital, we say to them, be careful about where you're praying, the location of your prayer time, what you're doing at that time, if you're praying together, because the enemy wants to take that prayer time to a passionate time, because it is so intimate. And then all of a sudden we let go of that, and we're married, and we're thinking, well, you know, do we need to, well, we're praying at the mealtime, and, you know, maybe we're praying before we go to bed. But when we get desperate for prayer, it isn't a seminar that's going to teach us. It isn't a symposium that's going to take us to prayer. It's our felt need that's going to take us to prayer. It's our desperation. You have not because you ask not. Matthew 18:19, how shall two agree? Or Amos 3:3, how shall two agree? I mean, so when we agree and when we pray, Matthew 18:19, there's something that happens, and it's saying as a couple, yes, this is intimate. Yes, but it's beyond us. We can't do this, but our Heavenly Father can. And unfortunately, as you're alluding to, we thwart that to a same-sex prayer partner at church, and we grow intimate with that friend, and we're missing that in our own home, in our own marriage.
How does this diffuse arguments, or how does this kind of become the negotiating table, if you will, where you take your petition, we have different views of this, Lord, and help us to see what you would have us. We're in complete opposite sides. We're in conflict. Lord, come and reason with us. Show us.
Yeah.
Help us, oh God. Does that, even through clenched teeth, is that something that is effective?
Yeah, I love what James writes. James chapter 4, verse 1. He says, where do fights and quarrels come from among you? Great question, isn't it? If you think back to any quarrel, any fight you had, what did it come from? It came from a desire within. And James goes on to say, look, it's your desires within you. You want something, but you're not getting it. It may be even something good that you want. It's just you differ on what that good is. And he says you don't have it because you don't ask God. And I think there's a key right there. Could we humble ourselves? Could we back off from the argument? Could we back off from what I want and what I think I need, or what the children need? And could we together come to God and ask God? We've done that. And my wife and I have given each other permission to even interrupt one another in prayer, because we say, well, look, I think what you're praying there is an answer. And you don't even know you prayed an answer. But as you're intimate with the Heavenly Father, you're praying, you're unloading your heart to God, saying, God, we're not agreeing here. We have a difference. We need your help. We need an answer. And we begin to talk to God. And then this happened to us so many times. As we become intimate with Him, we become more intimate with one another. We receive those answers to prayer. We hear the answer to our difference. And we need those differences. It's not that we don't. We need those differences in order to make a better decision. That's maturity. Immaturity is being unable to hear each other's opinion and come to a conclusion or come to a decision. Maturity is being able to hear each other and find where we discover agreement.
As we look at classic identities in marriage, the man's the provider. He's the fixer. He's the one that doesn't listen well because he's too busy thinking about the solution, as opposed to just allowing a spouse to unload, to vent, to speak without trying to be a solver. How do these roles, these identities, how do you navigate that within a marriage?
Yeah, it's something I think with time that you work on and you grow in, and you know, the longer that you know God, the more that I think He helps you to understand yourself. The very core of those roles, or what we feel like we need to provide in this relationship, is that we've got to know who we are. We have to know whose we are. We need to know that we are first a son or daughter of the Lord, and that He accepts us for who we are, and that our identity is in Him. It's not in this marriage. It's not in this person. It's not in our children. It's not in our job. But it's fully and totally and completely in Him. And as we exercise in our premarital book called Together, Knowing Who You Are in Christ, I think we've included it also in the same other book, because that identity piece helps us to develop the role piece. We don't want our identities to be found in our political beliefs, or all of these other crazy things that the world finds their identity in, our money. We need it to be fully and totally, completely in who God says that we are. When we have that, I really believe that takes so much of the tension out. It takes so much of the whole role confusion out. And it gives us a heart to serve, because the greatest in the kingdom is the one who's willing to serve. The greatest leader is the leader who says, how can I serve you? And that role of headship is a role of servanthood. It's a role of submitting my desires to God so that I might hear from him and I might be able to serve and help you as my spouse and love you the way Christ loves his church. I love that picture of marriage. Paul said it so well in Colossians 1:28. He said, I want to see Christ formed in you. That's my goal. That's my desire. And I believe that we have that as our filter. Is what I'm about to say, is what I'm about to do, is how I'm about to respond to my spouse going to build Christ in them, or is it going to tear them down? Is it about getting my needs met or finding my identity in my leadership, or is it about, wounding and hurting? Galatians 4:19, very much the same. Paul called these persons his children, who he wanted to see Christ formed in them.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that Paul writes, we have no clear picture in Scripture telling us he was married or not married.
Right.
Yet he writes to the widows and say if they're okay with remaining unmarried, they should, and if they can't, then they should get married. He offers up quite a bit of advice on the subject of marriage, and tells us to whatever condition we were in when we came to faith, we should endeavor to maintain that position or that condition, if you will. I look at that as a message to me. I wasn't Orthodox Jewish. I was conservative. I remain conservative Jewish. I don't wear talit, and I don't wear a fringe, and I don't wear a kippah all the time. I never did. And why take on that identity when it wasn't my identity when I came to faith? When I'm in the synagogue, yes, I do. When I'm preaching a high holiday service, I do. But other than that, I don't. And that was the condition I came into when I was saved. We look at Paul, we quote from Ephesians often about marriage and husbands. You should love your wives, and wives respect your husbands, and all that coming from a man that we don't even identify yet as being a successfully, happily married man. He never talks about his wife, never talks about his marriage. We don't really know. And we know that it was a requirement to be as part of the Sanhedrin, you had to be married, but he never claims to be a part of the Sanhedrin. So, we're still kind of up in the air as to whether or not Paul was married or not, giving such sage advice on marriage. What's your position on that?
Yeah, well, I didn't live in that day. I don't know. You are the Jewish scholar far better than me. But I do know this. Jesus was not married, but I know he didn't need to identify with everything that we identify with in order to understand us, in order to give us his answer from the Father. I know that he constantly said, I only do what the Father shows me. I only say what the Father tells me. And I think that's our position. We need to be very careful about some of our observations. We, fully understand the culture of that day. I'm interpreting that through, 2017. It's probably incorrect to even do so, but I do know that my Jesus is as current today, more current than tomorrow's newspaper, and that's where I need to receive my life and hope and revelation in marriage. I think God started this whole thing called marriage. It was his plan. It's what he gave us on this earth. And I love that he did that. I love marriage. I love it. And I'm sad when people are not truly embracing and enjoying their marriage, Christian or not Christian. I do think it's all from the Lord. And I just, I think so. We got to look to Jesus. He's our example in the faith.
As far as two people in the early years of marriage, what are some of the exercises that you would recommend that they begin to embrace end of first year, beginning of second year, into third year, as they start to develop a routine and that mission and sub-mission that you talk about, what are some of the things they can do to kind of take that steamroller, if you will, and iron things out before they get to be the big mounds of sweeping under the carpet, which creates just a big mound in the middle of the room?
Yeah, I love the whole aspect of finding where you fit as a couple, finding that local church, that local place of worship, finding out your marriage values. What are the most important things to you? It is the values aspect that we bring together. That's the hill to die on. Everything else is really, that's up for change. Roles, you mentioned roles. Those are, if you're good at something, if you're good at the checking account, then for heaven's sake, do the checkbook, So don't put me in that role because I'm terrible at it. Find out, discover what are those roles. I think is well, finding agreement. We know what we disagree on, but too often we don't concentrate on what we agree on. And finding agreement is just such a huge thing. It's just so empowering within marriage. Discovering what we agree on, discovering that mission, discovering, there's so much that the enemy wants to bring against marriage today. For example, he's encouraged to have you have all the sex you want outside of marriage and no sex within marriage. So I think the things that the enemy wants to take away are the very things that we need to center in on and concentrate on and do those things, keep those things active and alive in our relationship from the very beginning. So one of the things that Mary and I instituted was this, then it's simple and it's practical. We would always find each other before we leave the house, and we would kiss, and we would tell each other that we love one another. When we come home from the end of the day, we would find each other first, and we would kiss, and we would tell each other that we love each other. It's a simple practice. It's a simple thing, but it keeps intimacy, it keeps touch there. 40 years, we still kiss. We still hold hands when we go on walks and we exercise. It's those little things that we let go of in a relationship that maybe we did when we were younger, that I think we need to draw back into the relationship to keep that love and intimacy alive.
Well, it sounds like sage advice. I found it interesting that you have in the book lots of questions in the middle, not just at the end of each chapter like most are structured, but kind of give you a piece of information, then ask you about it, walk you through a deeper understanding of it so that you're not trying to digest too much. It's like eating your favorite sandwich. You eat it one bite at a time. This becomes a one bite at a time kind of instruction that guides you through and walks you through it. I think you have 6 words that are the most important words in a marriage that I'd like you to share with our audience.
I share these 6 words with every couple that we get to meet with. I share them when we get to speak at seminars and couples retreats. I share them. I just shared them when we had our daughter's wedding that I got to perform 3 years ago. It was part of my message. And so we have a chapter on, or a section on it in the book. We call it the 6 most important words in marriage. And those 6 most important words, and you can make it 9 if you want, but those 6 are, I am sorry, I was wrong. It's pretty hard to say those words sometimes. It takes a lot of humbling of yourself. It takes a side of pride. But I'm sorry, I was wrong, and if you want to make it 9, please forgive me.
Well, I've got 6 words to add, and that is buy the book and find out more.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome. We've been talking with Steve Prokopchak, author with his wife Mary of Staying Together, Marriage, a Lifelong Affair, brought to us from our good friends at Destiny Image. I encourage you that if you're young in your marriage, you're old in your marriage, that you too can have a joyful marriage and secure your longevity. You'll buy an insurance policy to prepare for the future. Why not prepare for the future now with your marriage and make it a long-lasting marriage? Staying Together, Marriage, a Lifelong Affair. Steve Prokopchak, thank you so much for being with us here on Revealing the Truth.
Thanks so much for the opportunity. It's been my pleasure. It's been a joy, and I trust that marriages are something, we said something life-giving to a marriage out there listening.
I pray so. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.